Hello, everyone. I'm Angelina Lippert, the Chief Curator and Director of Content at Poster House in New York City, which is the first and only museum dedicated to the art and history of the poster. And today I'm joined by my colleague, Tim Medland, who curated our current exhibition, We Tried to Warn You, Environmental Crisis Posters 1970 to 2020. Now, we thought it would be interesting for everyone that rather than a curatorial tour of the show, we would have a conversation about the structure and the content of the exhibition. So I guess my first question to you, Tim, is that the show is not really set up in chronological order, but in areas labeled earth, water, air, and fire. Why is that?
Curators are nerds, and just it's the way it is. And one of the things you do when you're putting together a show is you read a lot of books, you read a lot of information. And the most interesting thing that struck me virtually straight away is that there's not been a culture, a society, a religion that did not place the environment basically at the center of their beliefs. And this has been the standard for thousands of years. So I had quotes from 1000 BC, stuff like that. And so I thought, okay, let's look at the four original elements, earth, water, air, and fire, and see about, rather than having a chronological order, put it in that way and see what happens.
Okay, I mean, I get the ancient cultural illusion, but did the posters you chose fit easily into those categories, or did you have to like navigate additional complexities?
It was really interesting. It made it so much easier. I was actually surprised. I thought, well, it may be a bit pretentious, it may be this, but actually some posters fit into more than one area, but actually it made the whole thing flow. And when I've been taking people physically around for the tours, it works, which I guess is probably a testament to the four ancient elements. Go the wisdom of the elders.
Clearly. So let's talk about the first Earth Day. And I think we can probably see your slides now. What was the catalyst for the first Earth Day and how did it manifest itself?
So first Earth Day was in October 1970, and the prelude to it was an oil spill, the Santa Barbara oil spill, which at the time was the largest oil spill in US history. It's now only the third largest, sadly. It happened off the coast of California, and people were shocked and horrified. But there was one senator in particular, Gaylord Nelson, who understood that Americans at that point in time, and in other countries too, had been used to protesting. And they, marched for civil rights. They'd marched to end the Vietnam War, and politicians were listening. They were aware of people power. So he went to the population at large and said, I'm going to create Earth Day. You all should get involved. And they did. The population of America at that time was about 210 million people, and 20 million people got involved, either marched or got involved in events. And this poster deals with that. It's by Robert Rauschenberg, who at the time was the most famous American artist, and he had very much a collage style of working. So he created this specifically for the first Earth Day. And you can see the proud American eagle in a screen print, silk screen print, and against it, the backdrop of photo imagery of environmental degradation around the world caused by the activities of a sophisticated nation. So what was interesting about it, that it had pretty much an instant political impact. And when you go into the show, one of the first things you see is a great big quote by Richard Nixon, who people will tend not to think of as an environmentalist. They know him for other things. And yet, 20 million people marching or getting involved will focus the mind of a politician very, very quickly. So pretty much immediately, the Environmental Protection Agency was created, the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Acts were passed.
So Rauschenberg obviously is a pretty big deal. As you mentioned, he was the most famous American artist in the world at the time. Did many notable artists give their time to make essentially pro bono posters for environmental causes?
Over the last 50 years, which is the spell of the show, 1970 to 2020, though we add a few years and subtract a few years, it's not strictly 50. Yes, the answer is artists, graphic artists have contributed vastly with their time. And there's also a playlist available if you go on the museum's website, and it's amazing how many singers, performers have also given their time and tried to create. Artists are socially conscious, I guess.
Who are some of the other artists? I think the next slide actually features Peter Max.
Peter Max, indeed. So this one always makes me laugh. This is for a later Earth Day, and Peter Max is a very distinctive pop artist, and it's called Earth Day, and I guess that is the sun, but the rest of the planet really doesn't resemble Earth as I recognize it. It's a particular era. Maybe people are on some form of hallucinogenics, but the cosmic flyer is one of his famous figures. So you can see the cosmic flyer, the gentleman propelling himself through the sky, and somebody else gambling around the sun. But it's very striking, and it's a celebration of nature in some way. But yes, Peter Max was one of the other artists. And as we go through, you'll probably see names which you recognize.
Yeah, of course. And actually, how many countries' posters are represented in the show? And do they use maybe different visual languages from each other? In other words, can you tell a poster's country of origin by the imagery it uses?
I think there's 33 posters from 15 different countries. Mm-hmm. The nature of it is, yes, the imagery is different. I'm not sure you can always tell where the poster comes from, but there are very different styles. So what you're looking at now on the left is a poster by Hundertwasser, who was an Austrian architect and graphic designer. Should you ever be in Vienna, Hundertwasser House is, it's a housing complex, but it's actually also become a tourist attraction. And you can see in the background what looks like some of his buildings, and then either an anthropomorphic tree or a human being with roots. I really don't know. And it's about acid rain, but it's a Norwegian poster by an Austrian artist, and it's very abstract. One of the weird things about it, it doesn't photograph very well. The raindrops at the top are actually blue in a blue foil, and they come down in dark. Whereas on the right, you have a Japanese poster, and you would expect Japanese writing. I have literally no idea why it's in English, but it is a Japanese poster. And that one is taken from the image is of a grandfather, or the grandfather, in a long-running Japanese cartoon series, which has been running since 1946, is still running. And the grandfather is famous for wanting to protect the one strand of hair on his head. As you can probably see, if you can see me on camera, I have empathy with the gentleman concerned, but he's got the little umbrella to protect his head. For both of them, they're dealing with acid rain, which is a major problem in much of the world, and that's caused by pollutants, carbon-based pollutants, coming down in the rain. For instance, in India right now, or when the monsoons come, the pH of acid rain is that of grapefruit juice. So if you can imagine that falling on your head in his case, or on the buildings, or on the trees, it will do a lot of damage.
And I think I remember there being somebody on staff who's Japanese that said when they were children, they used to be told to put hats on their head to protect their hair from being damaged by the acid rain.
Absolutely, yes. It's an ongoing thing. And then if you look at this next poster, which I've just put up, this is actually a Polish poster from 1989. Poland had a long history of poster creation. In the late 60s, the government decided to let artists have a voice by creating posters. primarily for movies, films, or theatre. This is the first environmental poster that we could find, and it deals with a symposium that was to talk about effects within Poland. Poland at that time and still has a problem with, well, it mines a lot of coal. It has a gigantic area within it, which is also within Germany and the Czech Republic, known as the Black Triangle, and they mine lignite, a form of coal which is about the most polluting. So they have the effect of coal mining, so the dust goes up in the air. It's open strip mining rather than with a shaft, but they also produce 75% of their electricity still by burning coal, which will have an effect. So Polish posters are distinguished by their surrealism. So I think you can see 3 different posters all dealing with coal or rain effects and very, very distinct imagery.
Absolutely. Now, when did the message change from "Save the Planet," like we saw in the Peter Max poster, very like celebrate nature, to posters with more of a stark message, like that Polish poster we just saw?
So the Polish poster was from '89. These 2 posters here are from early '90s. These are both American posters, so '92 and '95. And in America, anyway, I think the shift happened in the '90s. So we went from a hippie, post-hippie era to something more concerned. And I think that's possibly because the initial legislation had happened, the good stuff had happened, and then there was a dearth of new activity. So you can see a Paula Scher poster on the left with the Empire State Building and a gigantic sunflower coming out of it, which bears no relation to any reality that I know, but again is a happy, trippy image. You know, who doesn't love a sunflower? So that's great. Whereas the poster on the right-hand side is by Seymour Quast, and it's bleak. I find it funny, but the British notoriously like to laugh at dark things. It's one of our ways of coping. And you know, you can see this gentleman bleary-eyed trying to shave through a gas mask in the morning, making the point, you know, air quality is still it was complicated in '95. It was complicated in New York for a few days this summer, but there are many cities and areas around the world where it's complicated pretty much every day of the year. So, you know, there's a space for the bleakness to address issues, because I think people get impatient.
Yeah. But speaking of gas masks, can you talk a bit about like the repeat imagery that we see in environmental posters and art? So like the gas mask, the polar bear, the planet Earth itself.
Yes. One of the critiques of environmental posters generally is that a critic said they're all gas masks and honeybees. And I actually don't have a single honeybee poster in the show to try and avoid that, but there are some gas mask ones. And you can see a Ray Osrin cartoon for the group Environmental Action from 1970, obviously riffing off Rodin's The Thinker, wearing a gas mask with, you know, just factories spewing all sorts of crap up in the air, and the water obviously polluted beyond belief. And so the first gas mask imagery came about in 1970 itself. So he's riffed off it very quickly, as a cartoonist would do. And that was a young man who was protesting in literally the first Earth Day march in Washington, D.C., wearing a gas mask to protest air quality. And he leaned forward to see if he could smell a magnolia tree. And there was a Associated Press photographer standing there taking pictures of demonstrations, because that's what they do. Took the picture. It went, in modern day speak, viral. It was, you know, syndicated around the world. I'm pretty sure he couldn't smell the magnolia through the gas mask, because it'd be a pretty crap gas mask if he could. But, you know, that was the first time when it was like, okay, air quality, gas masks, something to do. The one on the right is a Taiwanese poster, and it's one of those ones that affects people when they come and see it, because obviously the first image, it looks like a baby polar bear on an iceberg, and then you realize the iceberg is actually dead mommy bear with "Where's My Mother" underneath. And I was like, okay, when do we start using polar bear imagery is, they look cute, they're vicious, but they look cute. When do we start using them? And the answer, as far as we can tell, was in 2003. There was a debate in the US Congress about drilling for oil in Alaska, in the Arctic Circle. And this is a perennial debate that takes place in the US. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. At that point, Senator Barbara Boxer held up a big picture of a polar bear on an iceberg and said, these are national. This is a national park. We should not be doing this. We should be respecting the environment, all the stuff. And actually her side managed to win the vote at that point, delaying drilling in Alaska. The interesting thing, the photograph she held up was by a photographer called Subankar Banerjee, and he was due to open a show in a few weeks at the National History Museum, Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. And it was a big deal. It was going to be a big show at the front of the museum, much wall text. And in the 3 weeks between the vote and the show got moved to the back of the museum. The text was changed. It became a smaller show. And, as anybody involved in museums knows, that's really hard to do. I first came up with the concept for the show in 2020, and it opened in late 2023. And we couldn't really change much about it, even if we wanted to, because we'd done everything with it. So the amount of interference that must have happened to change that at a massive museum like the Smithsonian, or group of museums like the Smithsonian, must have been considerable. Mr. Banerjee was rightfully upset and took the show on the road via presentations like this around the US, not virtual, but big PowerPoint shows. And that's how the story got out of what happened. So it didn't work, but that's how, polar bears and ice flows became associated with the environmental movement.
So, I mean, you seem to be saying that both corporate actors and in the case of the polar bear, government actors have intruded on environmental advertising or propaganda, not always with the purest of motives. How does one deal with that?
Well, it's interesting. I just want to point out a couple of things, because you talked about Earth as well. And we have a German poster on the left, and an American poster on the right. And, they both reference the Earth, and it's logical, particularly in the 70s through 2000s. I guess we were all save the planet. That was part of the mantra. And we hadn't actually really thought much about the reason to save the planet is that humans live on it. And, save yourself, which is, maybe a rather more direct message. But these ones, are still concerned with the planets. The German one is actually a party political poster. It's for the Green Party in Germany. Alle Grüne sprechen für Grün translates to all the earth speaks up for the Greens. And they have, give or take 20% of the vote at any one point. So they're part of the government. In most countries, the Green Party is an activist movement, not something with cabinet posts. In Germany, that's different. And the other one is, it shows planet Earth inside a room, which takes it from large to vulnerable. But the first time that we really saw the Earth, if you can think about it, was in 1968, when Apollo 8 went up, looped around the moon, and took a shot of the Earth. And it was the first time we could actually see the Earth and think, oh, that's rather pretty, that's beautiful, but also intrinsically vulnerable, massive but vulnerable. and it became known as the Earthrise photograph. And somebody described it probably accurately as the most important environmental photograph ever taken, because it allowed graphic artists to draw lots of images of the Earth, but it also emphasized the vulnerability of the Earth, I think. On to your question about corporate actors.
Thank you.
And it's actually funny, of course, because this guy's an actor. But so this is a particularly, I'm not going to say it's the most controversial poster in the show, but it's up there. And a little bit of history, and I'll do a little bit of description. So it's titled Pollution, It's a Crying Shame, and you can obviously see a Native American there. And if you focus on one of his eyes, you can see there's a big tear. And this is a still image taken from a TV advert that started in the US in 1971, became massively popular. If you go on YouTube, it takes about a minute, the advert, and you can see it. It's got dramatic music. And I'll just describe it to you as you're hopefully watching this, not YouTube right now. There's a Native American in a canoe, and he's paddling along a stream, and you become aware of cans, dead fish in the stream, old water, other bits of detritus there, and then it spreads out, and the stream becomes a river, and he's got factories all around him, and the music gets louder, and then the camera pans in on him, the tear rolls down his cheek, or actually gets out onto the land, and then you hear, people start pollution, people can stop it. And it's a marvelous advert. The first time I saw it, I thought, that's good. Yes, we should not throw things into rivers. That's naughty. Don't do that. And apparently in 1970s, everybody thought the same. This is not an era of digital film, it's an era of physical film. The advert was so popular that TV stations asked for more film. They needed it literally, they literally wore through it. But of course, the fascinating thing is it's basically a lie. It worked. People stopped throwing stuff as much into rivers. That's good. But the Native American was actually a Sicilian American. He was an actor that played in westerns of the time, so he got shot repeatedly by cowboys. So is that, but also the group that put the advert together, Keep America Beautiful, was and remains owned by American corporations that were actively lobbying to be able to put stuff into rivers. So they were shifting responsibility onto the individual. Greenwashing, as it's now known. So this is the OG of greenwashing adverts, greenwashing campaigns. And it's very important when you see an advert to think, okay, who's actually doing this advert? And I think now the good news is this year, Keep America Beautiful handed the rights over to the National Congress of American Indians, who immediately banned it. They've thrown it away. It won't happen anymore. But nowadays, with the power of the internet, you can actually check sources rather more and see who's telling you stuff.
Now, one big thrust of your narrative that I really appreciate in your show is that you emphasize how governments have to be the ones to take action when it comes to issues of environmental protection. So what is the earliest poster in the show where you see a government using an artist to talk about an issue?
So the two posters you can see now are both by Hans Erni, who was a very famous Swiss graphic artist, famous and long-lived. His first poster was published when he was 18, his last when he was 103. So he was both prolific and he kept going. But the poster on the left is known as, or became colloquially known as, Death in a Glass. It's from 1961. It's the only poster that is actually from the pre-1970 era. It's just, I liked it, so it seemed to make sense to put it in. And it's very stark. It's a memento mori. It's remember you're mortal. And you can tell it's Swiss because it's in the 4 Swiss languages plus English. So the messaging, you couldn't escape it. I'm pretty sure everybody would understand, yeah, it's a really bad thing to have a skull in a glass of water. And Swiss water is, pretty much amongst the cleanest on earth. People, you don't worry about drinking a glass of Swiss water. And it's exported because of it. But no, if you're in Switzerland, you don't worry about drinking it, despite the fact there is heavy industry in Switzerland as well. So the government, had this campaign. It worked, and people react. And I think it's the thing with all of this that it's vitally important that people join stuff and get involved, that there are many grassroots movements. But the lesson learned is if you don't have legislation and also make sure the legislation is enforced, then it just doesn't work as well. The problem we now have, of course, is in the early stages, the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, you were dealing with legislation at the single country level. And now with the existential climate change threat, it's not just one country or one region. You need international legislation and for it to be enforced. And that's proving complicated, I guess, the polite way of putting it.
Yeah. Now, well, actually, speaking of discrete issues, before we get to the existential problems, that there's one poster in your show that I think is one of the most successful examples of government action that resulted in a very specific change, and that's the poster that you have that was issued by the EPA, so the Environmental Protection Agency, about catalytic converters. Can you talk more about this specific poster?
Yeah. So on the right-hand side is Richard Nixon's State of the Union address, or an excerpt from it, where he said, and bipartisan agreement was, that something had to be done in the US. So the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act were passed virtually straight away. And the Clean Air Act references this. And what they did was they said to car manufacturers, okay, your exhausts are disgusting. You're going to do something about it. You've got 5 years. And the car manufacturer said, but we don't know what to do. And said, you've got engineers, you've got scientists, you've got 5 years. That was the end of the discussion. And lo and behold, the catalytic converter was invented, which is a mixture of platinum and palladium in the back end of the exhaust. It creates a chemical reaction. It takes all sorts of nasty stuff out of the exhaust, and tailpipe emissions are 99% cleaner now than they were in 1970. So it works. Having said all, and the good news was, at that point, the US was in the lead. In 1975, they were the first country to mandate that all new cars had to have catalytic converters, which work. This advert is from 1973, though. It was before it became mandatory. They were being put on cars. And people were also hearing rumors that they took away power from your engine. They made them less economical. So people were like, well, do I have to have a catalytic converter? Because it hadn't actually been mandated. And so they were trying to take them off. And so the EPA sent this poster to your home. It literally was posted to you should you buy a new car. And it told you in no uncertain terms, if you take away your catalytic converter, you will, you'll be polluting your air. That's very naughty of you. More importantly, we'll fine you $10,000. And $10,000 was, it's a lot of money now. Then, I mean, the equivalent, I guess, would be somewhere between $100,000 and $120,000 now. So that's a fine, but it's just a nice yellow car, with the pretty image. But yeah, the biggest thing I took out of that was, ooh, that's a lot of money. If I had just bought a new car and had probably bought it on a loan at that point in time, I pretty much wouldn't want to have to worry about the $120,000 equivalent fine.
Yeah. Now that poster's in the air section of the show, and
Yeah.
so far we've started with earth and then moved on to water and then air. But the fire section, that's where we start to see people get really, really angry. Can you talk about that transition and the first poster in that section?
Yeah, I think, you know, earlier we had the Keep America Beautiful poster, and it wasn't until 30 years after it was produced that people actually found out what it was and why it was. And the nature of the world now is people know much more quickly when people have misbehaved, and legislation is great, and you sort of assume that people are going to follow laws. Um, Sadly, that's not always the case. And the first poster in the fire section deals with that. And if you are, you know, my accent probably gives away the fact that I was not brought up in the US. If you are in the UK or anywhere in Europe, you're used to seeing Volkswagen adverts plastered all over walls telling you how great and righteous and economical and reliable their cars are. This is not a VW advert. It looks exactly like a VW advert stylistically, but funnily enough, it doesn't even say we're sorry we did anything wrong. It says we're sorry we got caught. This references what became known as Dieselgate, when Volkswagen basically found a clever way of faking their exhaust emissions on their diesel cars. So if you took your car to a test place, it tested clean because they had to put it in test mode. When you drove it away in normal mode, it was less clean. And people were rightly angry when the whistleblower came forward and pointed this out. So far, the VW group has been fined $33 billion, which is quite a lot of money. The board all got fired. They even lost their Car of the Year ranking. Shocking. But you can see now we've been caught. We're trying to make you think we care about the environment, but we're not the only ones. It's calling out industry. And this, as what you said, as part of the fire section, dealing with the legacies, the internal combustion engine, the diesel engine, the use of carbon-based fuels have been massively beneficial to us all, and we all love it in lots of ways, but it's had a negative effect also. But more than that, we've been lied to about the negative effect, because other people knew about it before the general population. And this is where these two posters by Winston Seng come in. And they're very recent posters. And Winston Seng is an artist based in the US. And you will see these posters plastered around New York. He's got another campaign around Washington, D.C. at the moment. And they appropriate branding and imagery from well-known corporations, companies, TV programs. The one on the right is a fake Exxon poster. And you can see the former CEO of Exxon, former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, saying we're all in this together. It only came out fairly recently that Exxon was producing internally climate change data from 1977 on. So they knew decades before the rest of us what the effect of carbon-based fuels would be. And okay, great, but they not only did they not publicize it, they can continue to obfuscate about it. They now acknowledge the effect, but that's somewhat late. And the one on the left is Count von Count, a Transylvanian. You want me to do the voice? Von, two, because that's how he He
He does
counts.
that during every tour, guys.
I do it during every tour. Everybody loves it because I know internally everybody is putting on a Transylvanian accent. Most people have seen the TV program around the world, though I don't know how it's dubbed in different countries. Anyway, this references the Paris Climate Accord agreements from 2015 and the target of 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial times, which we would like to hit, the stretch target, which we really feel we should hit, of 2 degrees Celsius. Sadly, we're tracking to hit 2.8 degrees Celsius by 2100 at the present moment. And the numbers sound small, but 1.5 degrees is an ocean rise of about 1 meter, and 2 degrees is an ocean rise of 10 meters. And that's a big difference. And hence why the small child is pointing, I guess, to the 2 degrees and looking rather sad. But the Count is giving us a maths lesson and a science lesson, which is what the Count does in Sesame Street. And I like these because the subject matter is serious, but there's a dark humor to them. And I think that's one of the things when things get bad, is if you just clobber people with, we're in a terrible state and there's nothing we can do about it, people give up. And these posters address the issue very directly, but they do it with a slight lightness of touch, which is important. There's been lots of work in propaganda terms about how the most effective stuff is stuff where you can not necessarily laugh at the situation, but find some humor in it. It allows you to reflect and try and deal with the issues.
Now, obviously, Winston's posters have that dark sense of humor, as does the Brandalism piece you looked at for Volkswagen. But these are positioned in the show right next to a poster that looks like it's a parody, but is actually quite real. Was that like relationship done specifically?
It was done specifically, and it was one of those things that this was actually, for most of the posters in the show, we were actively seeking out environmental posters to be used. This poster was sent in to us by an advertising agency. And it's obviously, you can see it's for a Lexus hybrid. But, you know, the images of a glamorous couple in a $500,000 Riva speedboat protesting whaling. And there's so much mixed messaging going on in this. You know, for a start, I said it's a $500,000 boat. It runs V8 engines. It's not very economical at all. They're not really dressed for activism. Let's put it that way. And I guess the poster is supposed to encourage conscious consumption, as just opposed to conspicuous consumption. So yes, you need a car. Yes, you have $72,000. Buy a Lexus hybrid. It will make you a little bit more righteous. The funny thing was, we did a tour 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it was one of those tours where people can have wine as they walk around. And there was this couple who'd had a few glasses of wine, and they basically got into an argument. They're like, no, we're selling the damn Lexus. So it had completely the opposite effect that was wanted. The funny thing was, the advertising agency that sent this in is a big name one. And they were also the people who did work for BP in 2002, when BP was being criticized for their emissions as an oil company. And BP hired this agency and said, do something about it. And they did. They came up with the personal carbon footprint, which is something that lots of us have looked at. Oh, I should worry about my personal carbon footprint. But before you look at it, just be aware that it was created for an oil company to try and deflect, so you feel bad about your consumption while they carry on doing their stuff. And, you know, we still need carbon-based fuels at this point, but we should be trying to migrate away as fast as humanly possible.
Now, the fire section isn't just about like parody posters and humor, though. You also have a few very serious posters, like the ones you just put on the screen, that express the outrage people feel about the current climate emergency. And are these some of your favorites?
Yeah, I like both of them. They're direct. The first one is, it says "Rise for Climate, Jobs and Justice." It was made by a friend of the museum. I think that's a good way of describing him.
Oh, yes.
And so it's made for a march, and it's reflecting the climate justice, and that basically is the realization that we have now that in any country, it is generally speaking the poorer communities, the more disadvantaged communities that suffer. They're the ones that are nearest to the polluting plants that have their homes in floodplains. And they're actually, of course, sadly also the ones that actually produce least pollution. There are many countries around the world that are low-level countries. They're literally, not even a meter above sea level. Some are below sea level. They will flood. They will be underwater in the next 50 years. They will cease to exist as countries. But actually, they're not polluting countries on the same way that lots of us are. And that's unfair. The other one is a Cuban poster by OSPAL, which is a Cuban propaganda group, and it's very clever. The good news is it says at the bottom it's necessary that everybody participates for the Earth to win, and you can see in this game of tic-tac-toe, noughts and crosses, whatever you call it, wherever you are, you have the three Earths, so the Earth does get to win. But if you look at the crosses, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, pointing out that somebody's cheating. They still didn't manage to win, fortunately, but people were trying more goes. Yes, it's people are angry.
So it's interesting. You start the show with the first Earth Day, which came after a large environmental protest. And now, at least in the United States, we're kind of back in an era of mass environmental protest. Can you talk about the posters in your show that were specifically designed with protest in mind, as in like posters that were made for people to hold and use while demonstrating?
Yes, both of these are, you can get them online, print them at home, and carry them while you get angry. And the one on the right, they're both interesting because in the 1930s in the US, in the original New Deal, the American government provided employment, paid employment to artists, whether they'd be making posters, prints, whatever else. It was part of the structures created to give people jobs so they could be paid, so they could eat. Nothing too radical about that in lots of ways. But so what was produced at that point, there was the Works Progress Administration, WPA for short, and they had a very distinct style. People may know their national parks posters. There's a whole series of posters produced. They had a distinct style. These two posters very much reflect that style. The one on the right is for a piece of legislation which never actually happened, the Green New Deal, which was supposed to provide new green jobs across the US while moving towards electrification. And it focuses on Flushing Meadows, which was, which one of the
World's Fair?
World's Fairs was that? From 1939?
1939.
Yes, it's basically a very much a 1939 style poster for a World's Fair. The Green New Deal never happened, but it did morph through the political sausage machine into the Inflation Reduction Act, so which the Financial Times called the most consequential environmental policy passed by the US. So I guess that's good. The one on the left deals with the fact that the big 5 US banks are the biggest lenders globally to the petrochemical industries. So the theory is if you can persuade the banks to not lend to the companies, agencies, then they will have less money, therefore they will drill for less oil. And so those are, you know, things that people march with.
Now, before we get to the question time, as it were, I'll ask you one last question, which is COP28 is coming up at the end of November. And for those who don't know, this is an annual meeting of world leaders to discuss how to stop global climate change. Which poster, Tim, would you take to persuade the leaders to contemplate the issues, and why?
So the one you can see here is the one I would take. And it's interesting to me on so many levels, not least of which it's grown on me over I suppose we bought it 2 years ago, 18 months ago for the show.
Yeah.
All the posters in the show were bought specifically for the show, or we're not in Poster House collection. And this one is from a series of posters that were produced by Olivetti for the United Nations, which is interesting. They were raising money for the United Nations environmental programs by a corporation. And Olivetti produced these posters. This one is by Ernest Trover, but there were other famous posters by, I wonder if you can, no, you can't see over my shoulder. I've got a completely different poster. So they were produced by, Angelina, remind me, I'm going.
Georgia O'Keeffe, Liechtenstein.
Yeah, Roy Lichtenstein. So the big name artists. This one, Ernest Trover, is definitely now a less big name artist, but he was a big name artist in 1971. He was a sculptor, and he produced statues known as the Falling Man series of humanity, as he called it, falling backwards into an uncertain future. So you can see this figure, and you can see the shadow of the figure, which also looks like an oil slick, and you can see, you know, he's on a rising ocean. You can see the red sky, which was very much the way it looked in New York in August. And so it's from 1971, but it's strikingly contemporary, sadly. And the thing I like about it, though, is this thing of, it's a decision to fall backwards into an uncertain future. You can just actually choose to lean forward, or you can have a friend put their hand behind your back and push you and say, don't fall backwards. And so this is the one that I would like to take to the delegates and say, well, you've got the power to push the person forward. It's persuasive rather than just angry, I think.
Yeah, no, it also grew on me, because I think both of us were kind of like, meh, about this poster when we first got it, but then the more you looked at it, it grew on us. Oh, I love the final image. The final image,
you know, it's the last one because we're finishing bar questions. It's Porky Pig. It's That's All Folks. It's smokestacks. It's oil.
It glows in the dark.
It's got everything. It's got everything going on.
Yes, it glows in the dark.
And it glows in the dark, which is just lovely. Anyway, I think is it questions?
Questions now. If anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat wherever you are. I know we already have one. It's actually a very simple one. It's, can you please specify the year when Earth Day was first celebrated?
1970.
1970. And the author might also be interested in the general history of the first poster dedicated to Earth Day. But I think you kind of touched on that in the first slide.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about it some more. I mean, it was, there've been Earth Day posters, official Earth Day posters produced each year. Rauschenberg was pretty much the most famous artist, definitely in the US at that point in time, and he famously gave his time to, you know, anti-Vietnam protests, general social protests. He actually produced a second one in the show, which we just didn't have time to cover, but that's from 1992 for the Rio de Janeiro conference.
Another question we have is, in your opinion, how has the role of graphic design and visual communication evolved in addressing environmental issues over the years?
I mean, you know, there's no one generalization. I guess part of it, as we've covered, is it's got angrier. It's got, I don't know if it's a legacy of social media. People are more inclined to get angry quicker rather than say, celebrate what we have. So I think that's interesting. I do understand the anger, though, to be fair. So it's not.
I mean, it's sort of why we end the show with the fire section anyway, because generally things have gotten angrier.
But I think things have got angrier. But also, the references when posters started in 1970, it was the starting point. So now people riff on references going backwards and forwards. So you get a compounding effect, I guess.
What message or messages do you hope visitors will take away from your exhibition?
Vote. Join something, because it's a really good thing to do. But yeah, I think that's really it. Because legislation really helps. If you join something, if you get informed, it's been interesting doing the tours with people, that there's stuff which people don't always know. You have to actively look for information and avoid misinformation.
And actually, one of the posters the museum commissioned from Amos Kennedy is the Bill McGibbon quote.
Oh, I didn't shout out Amos's name when I said a friend of the museum. Amos Kennedy. He's great.
But yeah, so the quote is, what's the beginning of the quote? I know the end is join something.
No, that's it. It's he's asked yes what to do, and he's like, the best thing you can do is join something, because then you tend to get informed.
We have a spicy comment. Awareness is great, but are the posters that call for action or present the solutions to problems?
That is a good question. There are many posters that call for action. I mean, the marching posters, whatever else, the banks, the solutions to the problem. Again, they present their solutions to the problems, and as I said, I think activism is spectrum. Everybody may have different views on what the solutions are. There are groups that very definitely work together to encourage electrification, let people know what the options are. They just didn't do any posters that we could use. So there are many campaigns that can help. They just don't have posters, and unfortunately, we're solely a poster museum.
It's a problem. I love this question. How can we not lose faith in a positive ecological future?
I was reading yesterday about a campaign by an organization which shall remain nameless, where they're actually trying to persuade you to lose faith, because that means that you will just carry on the way things are, which means it will really help their bottom line profits.
Oh no.
I was like, well, bad word. I definitely can't afford to lose faith then, because I'm not giving you that easy win. The fascinating thing about where we are now is we know we have so many facts about what has happened, what is happening, and what will happen if we don't do something. More importantly, we actually now have technological solutions which are cost effective and scalable, that we can do something. These literally were not there 10 years ago. It would have been much better if we had known 20 years ago and we could have done it, but that's not where we are. So if we pass legislation, if we actually do stuff, if we start trading carbon credits at a reasonable price, all these things can happen, and we will actually be fine. We will not have to mitigate that much. It's inevitable that there will be changes. We're already living with the changes. There's nothing we can do about that, but they won't be disastrous for a large percentage of the Earth's population. So I'm actually optimistic, because we have facts now, and more people know the facts rather than are denying the facts.
No, that's great, actually. Are there international events devoted to environmental protection posters or artwork, and are they highlighted widely to attract public attention?
I would love it if there were more public art events. I think there should be more public art events. One of the interesting things generally is museums, many museums are now engaging in some form of environmental awareness programs for all sorts of good reasons. And the fascinating thing is the curators are all talking to each other. They literally were calling up saying, hi, can we come to your show? Do you want to come to my show? So there's communication happening. I guess this basically the start of globally about this. So it's becoming something that people are more aware of. And there are absolutely competitions for environmental protection posters. And, you know, from literally all around the world. We couldn't get posters from some of the countries in time, but it's an ever-growing thing. So yes, I think there will be more. And, you know, I hope now that we're getting to the stage where people will be able to download free posters, walk them on their marches, and hopefully the marches get bigger and bigger and bigger, because again, that will make things change.
Yeah. All right. Oh, I was about to say no more questions, and we got one. In your opinion, is there a distinction between individuals who value posters that address local environmental issues, such as the safety of their immediate environment, and those who appreciate posters that convey global ecological concerns and the fate of the Earth as a whole? That's a nuanced question.
I think there are two types of organization. There's that which encourages the local, and that which encourages you to, you know, think globally as well. I'm personally a member of both types. I think there's, you know, both have relevance, and I'm pretty sure that people get both sides of the argument now. And even the global organizations like 350.org, it's in, I think, 78 different countries, but each country has its own distinct subset of 350.org, and then regionally the subsections. So they're all producing, well, 350.org, they're all producing posters.
I don't see another question coming in. Okay, I think we're done with questions. But so I want to say thank you, Tim. Thank you to the American Center in Moscow for this opportunity. We love working with you. We've done talks in the past with you guys. And if you happen to be in New York, please come see Tim's exhibition, because it is wonderful. Sure. And it's on view till the end of February. So thank you very much and good evening.
Thank you all very much.